Good morning, everyone. My name is Mukta Naik, and on behalf of the Center for Policy Research, I would like to extend you all a very warm welcome for CPR Dialogues 2020. We're delighted here to have so many of you, familiar faces, friends of CPR, dignitaries here with us today, and especially thankful to Dr. Jaishankar, External Affairs Minister, for coming so early in the morning to start off our session. Before we begin, a couple of very short requests. We'd very much like you to keep your mobile phones on silent so that we can all enjoy today's proceedings. And also, we encourage you to tweet using hashtag CPR Dialogues 2020 so that we can amplify our voices outside of this room. And without further ado, I would like to invite Mrs. Meenakshi Gopinath, Chairperson of CPR's Governing Board, to kickstart CPR Dialogues 2020. Ma'am.
Honorable Minister for External Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, Mr. James Steinberg, Professor Frank Pike, distinguished members of the CPR community, media persons, friends of CPR, Professor Pratap Bhanu Mehta, a very, very warm welcome to the CPR Dialogues 2020. We are truly privileged to have in our midst such a wealth of expertise, experience, talent, and may I add, eminence in the room. And we are particularly appreciative of the time Dr. Jaishankar has made for us. We could not have asked for a better start to what we hope will be 2 days of intense engagement around policy perspectives for the 21st century. The CPR Dialogues, launched in 2018, is a unique multi-stakeholder forum where India's leading public policy thinkers, practitioners, academics, and members of civil society discuss the critical challenges confronting India today. CPR's current research is driven by a commitment to honest, open-minded, non-partisan, evidence-based engagement with processes and institutions that will shape India in the 21st century. These dialogues are an important instrument through which CPR seeks to meet this goal. This year's dialogue features discussions across a range of issues, from geopolitics and India's role in the changing world to pressing domestic concerns, including agriculture, the challenge of emerging technologies, education, economy and jobs, regulating India's financial institutions, air pollution, and creating robust state interventions that secure the socio-economic rights of citizens. We also celebrate several CPR landmarks, including the 5th anniversary of our Land Rights Initiative that has, among other things, produced a most impressive compendium of legislation on land rights across 7 states of India using sophisticated data analytics. We celebrate the completion of a hugely successful decade of our flagship accountability initiative, piloted and initiated by our President Yamini Iyer, and the launch of an ambitious research program on evaluating, assessing, and building state capacity, loosely referred to as the moral economy of the bureaucracy, on the impact and the functioning of public institutions. Since 2019, research at CPR has also focused on India's elections and democratic experience, yielding a rich repertoire of analysis, and this new work is being presented at the dialogues. Our President Yamini Iyer, who along with her team has curated this confluence with both imagination and dexterity, will walk us through the details later this morning. The range of issues on the menu to be discussed and the diversity of perspectives and positions is testimony to the lively debates at CPR that interrogate the monocultures of the mind and sustain the center as a progressive hub of policy dialogue and research. The dialogues enable us to share our work in the larger public sphere with the participatory publics, put it to stringent scrutiny, and draw from the reasoned critique that will help nuance, refine, and push the envelope further. Through all the multi-sectoral work that we do, the leitmotif always reflects an engagement with first principles, the long view of the nature of ethicality of the social compact, and how it delivers on democracy, on socio and economic rights, and enhances, above all, human dignity. This openness to the not always harmonious reverberations of research learnings prompt us to probe and chart time's other universe, not merely what is expedient for policy, but the normative dimension on how it impacts those it is intended for. As one of India's premier think tanks, now nearly 5 decades in existence, we continue to grapple with our evolving role and mandate. India, as we all know, is the 4th largest in terms of think tank numbers, and we are moving in to occupy the space ceded by universities as invaluable sources of policy ideas. And so we continue to ask ourselves, can we effectively act as a bridge between state, civil society, and academia? To what do we speak, and who do we speak for? Does our knowledge production feed effectively into policy spaces? Do we sustain a wider epistemic community beyond the compulsions of funding deadlines? How useful is our research? To whom does it really matter? Do we buttress the democratic process? Are we successful in decolonizing our language, wresting it away from elite bastions to place it squarely within the realm of democratic debate and dialogue, responsive to the heat and dust of subaltern aspirations? What were the conversations that we could not make happen between policymakers, civil servants, civil society, and practitioners? In our quest for solutions, how sensitive have we been to what questions there are which we fail to ask? So the think tank surveys and rankings notwithstanding, do we see ourselves as something more than an international intellectual service industry, or as a non-partisan font of ideas whose time will come, as a crucible for innovative training and policy research? There are no easy answers to these, but it is this incessant engagement that keeps CPR young and abuzz. Foreign policy and security studies comprise a major focus of research at CPR, a flagship program along with big initiatives like the Accountability Initiative, land rights and climate change and environment, technology and society, environmental justice, scaling city initiative, urbanization, sanitation, and so on. The foreign policy program draws on a wide reservoir of expertise and experience, and that has been even more enriched by its association with Ambassador Shyam Saran, who will be with us shortly, Ambassador Das Gupta, and lately Ambassador Mukhopadhyay. So the big question for us today revolves around navigating the emerging geopolitical landscape at the threshold of a new decade. As norms of engagement and the global order change, how should India define its geopolitical position? What are the new configurations at play? And as India seeks a more expansive role on the global stage, both within the security architecture and providing new conceptual alphabets to impact the discourse, how does it seek to synchronize its vision both domestically and externally? Much has been said lately by you, sir, of the Indian way. India, and I quote, as a stabilizing, law-abiding, rule-based influencer internationally, bringing its capacity to bear on the international system for global good, increasingly as a decider or a shaper rather than an abstainer, a fair power, a standard bearer for the global south, a contributor to connectivity, firm in dealing with challenges like terrorism, and engaged with global issues like climate change, end quote. What then are the contours of this Indian way? What are its likely resonances? Who better to shed light on this than the person who is today at the center of decisions that determine India's options, direction, and strategic choices? And as someone who has so effortlessly straddled the worlds of academia, the bureaucracy, and seamlessly transitioned into the political sphere, or should I say, realpolitik. Foreign policy and security are in his DNA. As the son of the iconic K. Subrahmanyam, the guru of strategic studies and defense and foreign policy India, whom some of us have had the privilege to work with, I guess he did not have a choice. Dr. Jaishankar, with 4 decades of diplomatic experience as Foreign Secretary, as our longest serving ambassador to China, playing a pivotal role in reinforcing economic trade and cultural relations with China, and as India's ambassador to the US, where he proved a deft negotiator on some delicate and thorny matters, we have witnessed the impact of his formidable diplomatic skills in the recently concluded visit of President Trump to India, that Ambassador Shyam Saran has described as, and I quote, a visit like no other, one that has taken the Indo-US partnership to a distinctly different level, and where, I quote, the mutual payoff has been significant. Dr. Jaishankar and Ambassador Saran, as we know, were closely engaged with negotiating the landmark Indo-US civil deal. And so we have a fortuitous synchrony of 2 outstanding expert practitioners who at different times have steered the course of our diplomatic history. Please welcome Dr. Jaishankar to serve his insights, after which he will be in conversation with Ambassador Saran. Thank you all. Dr. Jaishankar, may I invite you? Ambassador Shyam Saran, may I invite you up as well?
A very good morning to all of you, and I would like to say it's a great pleasure to address this conference on the emerging geopolitical landscape that characterizes the decade that the world is poised to enter. By the way, I must say, if you look at what my other siblings did, I think I did have a choice. At least I thought so. Anyway, today the subject we are intending to discuss is actually one of intense argumentation, but perhaps not yet of adequate consensus. This includes the transformational changes in politics, economics, technology, climate, etc. over the last 20 years. In fact, a change in our very mindsets. Many of us are still unable to come to terms with the declining shelf life of the old post-1945 order. And it is an even bigger challenge to fully recognize the elements which drive the one in the making. Assumptions of various dimensions are being questioned at home as well as abroad. What we can just about agree upon is that the world is in the midst of a real transition. But our reading of the directions we head perhaps depend more on our own preferences, interests, viewpoints, and hopes. Therefore, there can be no better time than this to debate all of this. Now, if the head table stands seriously disturbed, then it's only to be expected that the rest of the room will be in even greater flux. And that is the state today with the global order as we struggle to absorb a nationalistic America, a rising China, a divided Europe, a re-emerging Russia, a normalizing Japan, an insecure ASEAN, and an even more disturbed Middle East. Other continents and regions are not without their own challenges, including ours. And economic rebalancing has now started to translate into its political manifestation. And that means a fundamental overhaul of the global architecture. For a nation like India, that till now had to largely maneuver against binary or unilateral dominance of other powers, this calls for a much more complex and nuanced strategy. At the same time, our own capabilities and stakes in the world have also grown significantly. Others have started treating us as a player sometimes as a competitor, in a manner for which there is little recent precedent. How to increase our likes and how to minimize our dislikes is today a diplomatic objective, even as we seek to secure our interests and enhance our influence. Now, this rebalancing of the world taking place is accompanied by growing nationalism across vast geographies. There's no question that the overall mood is more competitive. In some cases, people would say more selfish. The very nature of politics has changed in different societies, and the disapproval of those who lost out does not make it less legitimate. Obviously, every region and possibly every nation has its own individual explanation. The causes can be as different as the effect. The net result, however, is of a weaker collective and a greater dispersal of power. Multilateralism is one of the casualties as big powers disregard rules in pursuit of their national objectives. Quite independently, alliance cultures have also eroded visibly due to the changed demeanor of the United States. Overall, global consideration and decision making is much less coagulated than before. This not only reduces the salience of the great powers, but gives more room to the middle ones, especially in the exercise of regional influence. We see that very visibly, for example, in the Gulf or in North Africa. As players behave more nationally and agendas become more complex, plurilaterals have emerged as the mechanism to fill the gap left by weaker multilateralism and eroding alliance cultures. Convergence emerges as an adequacy standard for nations to work together. Given its history of independence and flexibility, perhaps it is only natural that India should emerge as an industry leader in this regard, whether it is in the RIC, SCO, Quad, or J. The impact on the global commons of these changes has been profound. At one level, there is the reality of global supply chains and transnational capabilities that transcend Westphalian limits. But at a time when challenges of climate change, terrorism, connectivity, maritime security, pandemics, and digital vulnerability extend beyond borders, the inclination and ability to work together is paradoxically declining. The prospect of addressing new domains of concern, such as cyber or space, is less now when it should be more. The implications of the change in American posture on international commitments cannot be overstated, given that this was a key element of the post-1945 order. That other major powers have not moved beyond their national objectives indicates that the resulting deficit will remain unfilled. For its part, India has stood out as a country willing to do much more, even though its limited, though growing resources. But the problem remains for the world in the foreseeable future. Now, economic challenges offer us even less ground for complacency. In the last many years, the world trading system has felt the pressure of gains that some accrued from structural advantages. At a stage, it had to turn political. It finally did. But today, this argument extends beyond to non-trade domains like connectivity projects, technology choices, data protection and security, as well as IPR adherence. All of them have strategic connotations, and to pretend otherwise is only to delude ourselves. In fact, for that very reason, we have started a technology division in the Ministry of External Affairs. Therefore, navigating the economic world will be no less complex than the political one. Here too, nations will try to optimize outcomes and bridge divides as they pursue their national objectives. For India, there will be the additional challenge in a more digitized world to create new partnerships, and foster greater mobility to service a knowledge-based economy. Fashioning an appropriate diplomacy to tackle this set of issues is clearly a priority. The world has today a growing interest in India, becoming an additional engine of growth. It is also amenable to harnessing the reservoir of talent that India could provide with the passage of time. Particularly so, as it is democratic talent that is sensitive to the culture of rules. Our strong commitment to realizing sustainable development goals is deeply appreciated, including for its global significance. Whether it is in terms of technology, best practices, or resources, there is a proclivity to partner with a nation whose prospects are clearly so assured. Our challenge is to enhance the pull factor by undertaking deep reforms and addressing long-standing governance issues. Our economic engagement with the world also requires careful deliberation and effective preparation, lest we end up eroding our own capabilities. How to do that best in this emerging geopolitical landscape is a complex exercise, and that surely deserves serious strategizing. The last few years have demonstrated a growing Indian capacity to contribute to the global discourse and make a difference to international outcomes. We have significantly shaped the connectivity debate at a time when the world was still very confused, and backed that up with a plethora of projects, including in our immediate neighborhood. Our single-minded campaign against terrorism has brought that issue into sharp focus in key world forums, including the G20. Where maritime security is concerned, India has emerged as a key player, especially in the Indian Ocean. Our collaborative efforts at monitoring white shipping, strengthening surveillance and patrolling capabilities, and preparing for disaster situations have been notable. We are today widely perceived as among the first responders to HADR situations. Initiatives like the International Solar Alliance or the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure underline how much we contribute to combating a global challenge like climate change. At the political level, our confidence in overcoming the hesitations of history has opened up new space. Strategic clarity has helped us to take advantage of that more effectively. Overall, the India persona is much more in evidence in a variety of ways on the international stage. Our footprint has visibly grown in Africa, whether it is through new embassies and serious political attention, or greater development assistance and expanded training. Indeed, this combination of significant engagement and deeper collaboration that extends from the Caribbean to the Pacific Islands prepares us for a global mindset in the coming years. The world may be on the threshold of a new decade, but India is poised to enter the next phase of its own evolution. After a generation of extolling the virtues of globalization, we are today in a fractured world with polarized debates. Not only has the landscape become more difficult, but the very articulation of interests has come under challenge. Competition is not just among states, but often within them, reflecting the tension between the old order and the emerging one. When ideologies, identities, and history mix with business, politics, and strategy, it can create a very potent cocktail. But the need of the hour remains more sober conversations, and I'm glad that the CPR dialogue today helps to meet that demand. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a very productive day ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for a very erudite and very stimulating set of observations. As you can see, there is a huge interest in the kind of debate that CPR is trying to promote, and we are very grateful to you for taking time off from what is a very busy schedule. Today the Parliament, I think, is reopening, so we won't take too much of your time. Let me just pose a few questions to you. One is that you did mention the fact that we are, in a sense, India's profile is increasing. India is expressing its own, in a sense, preferences with regard to what the shape of the new world would be. There is a certain contradiction which I see in terms of our foreign policy making, and I just wanted your views on that. You see, if you look at history, most of the advanced developed countries that we have today, there is a certain symmetry in their emergence as important players on the international stage and their internal development in terms of, the indices of economic well-being, welfare for their citizens, per capita incomes. So there is a certain kind of parallelism in terms of their emergence on the international stage, but also in terms of their, not just their macroeconomic impact, but in terms of, how their societies and how their economies have developed. In the case of India, and I would say to some extent even with China, our macro impact is very large because we are very large emerging economies, and therefore our footprint is, in fact, whether you like it or not, is going to be larger as time goes on. It already is very large. As you said, we have a global, in a sense, footprint. But if you look at much of the internal indices of economic well-being, per capita income, the kind of economic challenges which we face, we are still not a developed country in that sense. So what happens is that on some issues, we are in a sense a demander from the global commons. But in other issues, we are in fact a contributor. And there is a constant tension between these two aspects. And foreign policy, to me, it seems, becomes somewhat much more of a complex exercise than it would be precisely because of this tension. In many cases, you would also hear that, foreign policy at the end of the day should serve the development of the people of India and their prosperity and their welfare. How do we manage this tension?
Let me first say that I'm very glad you brought that up. I actually think this is an avenue of thought which you should actually develop because, if you look at how other nations kind of emerged in modern days on the global scene, the fact is every big player rising has no precedent. Everyone is a sui generis case. But you do tend to say, well, China did that, so what am I doing? Now, the fundamental point you made, which is clearly we are very different from the developed countries, the Western countries, because by the time the modern era came, they had already developed. Okay. They developed maybe at the cost of the rest of the world, but it was an earlier era. So the models that we can possibly be compared to, I would say, maybe starts with Japan. Meiji Restoration. Or if you say, okay, that was an odd one, maybe Soviet Union, where you have peasant societies, large peasant societies, industrializing, then that process, it's not like they wait to develop to secure their political interests. In fact, they first define their interests they define their interests in parallel with that ambition. So you can see whether it was the Japan Meiji Restoration, Soviet Union, the communist period, then ASEAN would be a little bit different, but then China would be the other big case. So in each of these cases, you actually you develop, you raise your ambition level, you develop more, your ambition level keeps raising. There's a dynamic out there. So the question is, what do they do at the international stage when they are still on that phase of that graph?
That trajectory, yeah.
Now, the most recent case and the one we keep getting compared to is China. And China kept its head low. I mean, so they found ways of expressing that. But even in keeping that head low, it was nuanced over a period of time. I mean, it wasn't a head low, it was a gradually raising head. I mean, and then at some stage, I would say after 2012, they kind of came out more sharply. I don't think, we have the systemic characteristics to emulate that, you know. We can't tell, you know, ours doesn't have that kind of collectivism, where you tell people, all of us will behave like this until the day we don't, which the Chinese could. So you will have, I mean, the beauty of India is the cacophony of India. So we will have our debates and they will get played outside, I mean, which is exactly what is happening right now. So the second is, because China did what it did, I think even in the improbable event of Indians actually keeping silent, which is, you know, an impossible feat, but if that actually happens, I don't think people will accept that, because they've seen what China did. So they will know that you have ambitions, they will know that you have aspirations, they'll know you have demands. So it will happen. So I think both our compulsion and frankly our natural, our DNA in a way. Our natural path is to be ourselves, to debate our issues openly, knowing in this globalized world, a lot of these debates will become international, you know, debates will get linked with international debates. Accept that as what, you know, for what it is. And yet find ways by which, you know, you become relevant to the world, appreciated by the world. They kind of develop interest in you, use in you. In my view, some likes in you. I mean, all of this.
Sure. What I was pointing to was, I'm not suggesting that you know, we need to somehow retreat from the very active kind of role that we have. But in playing that role, you can be very active in terms of, you know, advancing your positions, but you can also be very active in terms of, you know, safeguarding your interests, particularly interests because you are still a developing country. High table is fine, but high table without the substance in terms of your actual economic strength may not always yield, you know, the best results. For example, I found that in terms of climate change negotiations, you know, being linked to China actually was undermining a lot of our interests, because we were not where China was. If you look at in terms of emissions, if you look at in terms of our energy poverty, actually we need to develop our energy resources far more in a far more accelerated way than we have done so far. And there will be some emission consequences. But, you know, being linked there, in a sense, undermines our position. So this is where the world also needs to recognize, and we need the world to also, you know, be conscious of the fact that in making demands of India, you have to also keep in mind the fact that India is today at a very different place than where China is. I mean, that is one aspect that I'm looking
at.
Yes,
except the point I was making is, there was a time when the world was more amenable to arguments of justice, entitlement, fairness, etc. I'm also making a point that the world has changed. That today, if you look at the global mood, you know, today, I think a lot of those arguments, who are you linked to, you know, I'm per capita different, etc., etc. That there is I won't say there's a fatigue with it. I just think that the thinking of the world, especially key players in the world, has gone beyond that.
Sure. Yeah.
So it is a much more competitive world. It is much more, in a sense, you know, I think it's a less fair world in many ways, which is why, in my view, we should step forward on the fairness part of it. But managing and, you know, how much of a voice should we aspire to? This is a modulation issue. Because if I wait till I develop, what would happen is, in fact, if I don't, I mean, it's a bit of that squeaking wheel gets the oil. I mean, so if you don't make a noise, you don't get what you want. If you make a noise prematurely, as you say, without adequate preparation, that can go against you. So how do you get that judgment? I think a lot of foreign policy today is about where do you raise your head on what issue, to what degree, with what result, and what are you prepared to put on it?
Yeah, sure, agreed. Anyway, as I was trying to point out that this is a somewhat complex, exercise. Let me turn to something else. You did mention in your remarks that, obviously the world is going through a very major transition, and transition virtually in every dimension that you can think of. Now, to add to all those transitions and all those uncertainties, we now have the coronavirus, which, to my mind, perhaps we are underestimating the global impact of what this really means. Quite apart from the fact that it also addresses a very important issue which you raise, that precisely at a time when a large number of our challenges are really cross-national in character, they are global in dimension, you need multilateral approaches, you need collaborative approaches to be able to deal with them. That is precisely the time when that is in fact being weakened rather than strengthened. And this is perhaps one of those kind of public health challenges that is global in character. It may have erupted in China, but it has spread very quickly. We don't quite know what it will become and how soon we will get over it, but there is no doubt that it is already having an impact. For example, you mentioned the global value chains. Many of those global value chains are being very badly disrupted by this. And the longer this goes on, the disruption will be worse, and the impact on the global economy, and if there is an impact on the global economy, the impact on us, whether we like it or not, and on many other countries. This is something which is the other kind of a black swan emerged. So in terms of dealing with these kind of sudden eruptions, which may, I mean, it's like a shock that appears. How well positioned are we in order to deal with this kind of challenges?
Well, to me, I mean, I must tell you, the first thing I do every morning when I get up, literally, is you get a daily coronavirus. No, before I even wash my hands, I actually look at my phone, because you get a daily coronavirus report. Which actually gives you a kind of a global and a China number and a global number. And it is a growing concern. Now, if you step back, I mean, to me, there are two big lessons out of coronavirus. One, it actually demonstrates to you the extent of global, when you talk of globalization, what it actually means. You can see it in the way in which it spreads. It tells you today how integrated the world is in many ways. The second, which we will probably discover with the passage of time and not that long, will be how central today China has become to the global economy. Because, some of you would have seen in one of our newspapers this emissions map today, which was what was it like same time last year in China, and what is the emissions picture today. And, there's a dark red, and there's a red, and there's an orange, and there's a yellow, and now it's all white. Okay. So, if Chinese production slows down, I don't think if it is actually happening, you are not going to just affect Chinese growth rates. You are actually, you're going to end up with 90% finished cars in different parts of the world, which obviously cannot be sold to anybody. Yeah. So, there will be, I think, there could be significant consequences. I think the coming weeks would sort of tell us that. But how do we respond to it, your question? One, of course, one was an immediate challenge we had, which was that we had a lot of people stuck in Wuhan. Many of them were students, but many of them were people who are working in Wuhan, who had been sent by their companies out there. Now, we decided that we at least owed it to those people, because they were at the epicenter, to make the effort to bring them back. I mean, generally in such cases, WHO advises you not to increase travel, to actually reduce travel, but I think common sense said at least the people who are stuck at Wuhan should be treated differently from the rest of China. So we focused on that. We did these 3 evacuation missions. But before we did that, we actually have a group of ministers who, I mean, pretty much the moment coronavirus news got out, the group of ministers were constituted, and a group of secretaries under cabinet secretary. So a group of ministers headed by health minister. So we meet regularly. We have a meeting today as well. So what we did was we started thermal screening very early, both first in the airports, then in the ports. We realized we would have to do Wuhan evacuations, so we set up this quarantine facility in Manesar. And then we have progressively, wherever we have encountered problems, we had because of Diamond Princess an issue in Japan. We've seen cases spike initially in Singapore, but today much more in Korea, Italy, and Iran. We've been really quite firm in the measures we've taken, where we have been required, in certain cases for 2 countries, we have cancelled all visas, including visas which were issued, which is in China and now in Iran. We've really stopped air connections. We are, with China, insisting, we've put in place compulsory quarantine of anybody who goes there. We've put out travel advisories. And I mean, for me, at the end of the day, it was a sort of a integrated government, I mean, it was an exercise in integration.
Whole of government.
Whole of government kind of thing. And, sometimes crisis tests you. And my own sense is, we kind of respond to these better. And one of the reasons we do is that we've also I made a reference to HADR situations. HADR are also whole of the government responses. Somebody gets the supply, somebody gives you the aircraft, somebody else, provides the people. So that ability of the government today to come together to deal with specific situations, and we've all been in the government. Often you worry about financial approvals. Those sort of things we've actually managed to get good SOPs.
Okay. So let me not monopolize this conversation. I'm sure that there are several questions. We have about 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So please, if you have any question, please raise your hand. Please identify yourself, and please ask a question, not make a comment, and make your question, please, very short. Yes. Yes, please.
Minister, I'm Ajay Shukla. I'm sure you would agree that one of the primary challenges on your plate right now is the emerging situation in Afghanistan. Where does India find itself right now at this point, and what's the way forward as we go ahead? Thank you.
What I could do, because I'm a little tight on time, maybe I take 2 or 3 questions and then.
Any other question, please? Where are you? Yeah, okay.
Good morning to you, Minister. My question relates to regional cooperation in South Asia. We have preference for a particular regional grouping, BIMSTEC, but now we notice that the consensus in the region is fraying somewhat. What are your thoughts on it, sir?
One more. Okay.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister and Ambassador Shamsaran. As is probably to be only expected from Dr. Jaishankar, it was an absolutely flawless presentation, which was almost music to the ears to hear your analysis in the state of play in the world today. To come to the comment or the question, which came really from the other intellectual giant who posed to you, Ambassador Shamsaran, on the kind of discordancy perhaps between what is at home and in terms of our abilities and the image and the role that we seek to play in the world. Your brilliant answer to that, on where you see the space for India to step forward and play a larger role, given all the capabilities, talent, skills, and our values set and so on, that somehow immediately reminded me of a very Nehruvian world order, you know, where our internal capabilities, because of the economy and so many other factors, I think have much to still reach, whether we keep our head low or we keep raising it slowly. Isn't it again, and there might be some, it might be instructive perhaps to get some lessons that, you know, when the going is good, we will have all the ideas, all the talents, all the initiatives, but then what is the situation in terms of our capabilities? Thank you.
Let me start with Afghanistan. Well, I think all of you would agree that what we saw at Doha, in a way, I mean, it was not a surprise. Everybody knew something like this was happening. I mean, it's been talked about for so long. It was almost like finally seeing Pakiza after 17 trailers of the movie. So the issue for us is, at the moment, the United States is talking in terms of thinning down its presence and providing support for the government in Kabul and the NSDF. Now, how that plays out, obviously, time will tell. I would only say, as a person who's been to Afghanistan from time to time, that I do believe that the last 18 years have brought about big changes. So when I look at a lot of the prognosis, I would remind people that this is not the Afghanistan of 2000 or 2001. Many things have happened since then. And to the US and to the West, our message has been that, you know, though the achievements of the last 18 years, it is in global interest that those achievements are secured, they are protected, they are not jeopardized in the process of whatever they do. I think we have to wait and see how this plays out. Again, part of the problem is, till now, you know, when real negotiations have, I mean, to my mind, the real negotiations will start now. And then we'll have to see whether many of the assumptions that we had, you know, how cohesive are various players, what do they do, what are their demands, you know, finally sort of does Taliban join a democratic setup, or does a democratic setup sort of adjust to Taliban? I think those are all issues which, for which right now there are no clear answers. What we do know is that there will be this intra-Afghan dialogue. There is a lot of interest in various countries that the neighbors of Afghanistan and those who have interests there also play some role. Again, who plays what role will take a little while to work out. But I would really, I mean, my most honest answer to you at this stage is, you know, you are watching that space, I am watching that space, and that space is going to evolve. Regarding South Asia, you know, what is our preference? Look, our preference, it is not that we have preference for organization B over organization A, or in this case S. The issue is, if you are talking regionalism, you can't talk regionalism without talking connectivity, without talking trade. And if you say, well, you know, I'd like to do regional cooperation, but I'm not going to allow connectivity, and I'm not going to do normal trade, I won't give you MFN status, then obviously you're not serious about regionalism. So we, I think, are open to any today any possibility which takes regionalism forward. I mean, to my mind, this has been one of the interesting evolutions in Indian thinking, that India was actually very suspicious initially of regionalism. Today, we are the most enthusiastic sort of proponents of regionalism, not just proponents. I mean, if you look at the investments we have made in our neighborhood, they are really very, very impressive. I mean, we do we've done globally up to now maybe about 530 projects. Roughly half of them are in our neighborhood, and probably maybe 2/3 of them, I have the numbers somewhere, 2/3 of them are actually dealing with connectivity. And many of them are today, I mean, we've also kind of learned on the job our ability to deliver on many of these projects. I mean, we actually have today projects which we did this, the Amleganj, Motihari, that pipeline, which was delivered below cost before time. Now, that's not something which you typically associate with government projects. So we will, obviously we will be active with BIMSTEC, but our general approach has been and will be really to encourage regionalism. Then coming to Neelam's issue. Look, India is India, okay? We will have our debates. I mean, at the moment, I think our debates are particularly passionate. And in this world, I mean, if coronavirus can reach Italy, I mean, this is a globalized world. I mean, people will listen to our debates, sometimes link it to their debates, have views on us, we will have views on them. So all of that, I think today is not something I would regard as some kind of deviation from the norm or a distraction. I mean, we saw all of this coming when we made the decisions we did. I mean, the point is, today we've had on a number of important issues, we have been kicking the can down the road for many, many years. Some cans are no longer being kicked down the road. You may agree with it, you may disagree with it. So when we did this, we know that there will be ripples. It's something the foreign policy side of the government has to step forward and handle. It's part of the plan. On the issue of, you did the comparison, you said the Nehruvian comparison. Look, again, I would say where India has changed, and this is not an ideological point, it is that we have learned at great cost the importance of hard power, the importance of security capabilities, the experience of real politics. I think it was the 50s, in a sense, to some extent, was a sort of age of innocence. And I think we have grown beyond that. So today, when we look to do, have a greater role and do more things in the world, it is much more capability driven than it would have been in that era.
Okay, thank you very much. You have been extremely generous with your time, and you have been very patient answering all the queries raised to you. I think we have, okay, Yamini. Yeah, thank you very much. I'll see.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar and Ambassador Saran.